Hello, everyone. Welcome to this next session. I hope you've been enjoying around so far. I know I have had some amazing conversations with amazing creatives. So, in this session, join Sasha Selipanov and Abdulaziz Alobaid in a controversial conversation around the future of automotive design workflow. Are we going digital and never looking back? Uh, are the expected skills transforming into new standards? Who will be able to call themselves automotive designer in the future? So, without any further ado, I would love to welcome Abdulaziz and Sasha to the stage. Hey, guys, how's it going?
Hey everyone, how's it going?
It's going great. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, well, nice to see you on stage. And so, first, before we get started, I would love to hear a little bit of an introduction from you guys. So, yeah, Sasha, we can start with you.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Selipanov. I'm a car designer. I have about 2 decades of experience in the industry. I worked for many different companies, including some sports car companies, which are a special passion of mine. I worked at Lamborghini, Bugatti, Genesis, and Koenigsegg, and running my own design consultancy now, and also founded my own sports car company and showed our first car just this summer at Pebble Beach. So
Congrats on that.
Congratulations on that.
thank you, guys. Thank you very much. It was a crazy summer. I'm still recovering. I'm below my usual level of, let's say, performance at this point in time because I'm just recovering from the summer.
The results are great, it's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdulaziz. It's a pleasure.
A pleasure to be here. My name is Abdulaziz Alobaid. I'm from Saudi Arabia, car designer as well. I founded FAIIDA Design and Innovation Firm. We do we do three main things. We focus on education because in Saudi it's still brand new. We're our first transportation design studio here. So we do education and industrial design and automotive design as well. And we focus on design and innovation. And within next year, we'll shift our focus to start doing bringing products to the market. This is our aim. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for these guys. And well, it is kind of like a very juicy conversation because there's so many things happening right now in the automotive space in terms of tools that are available, the process that is changing, and so on. And obviously, you guys are coming from a bit of a more you can get to choose your process in many ways because you work you don't work necessarily in these like super large OEMs that have a very strict process in there, but you're probably the ones that are starting to see the change first before it gets to everyone, right? And so the big question, like the first one that I would love to start with is, are we going digital and never looking back? So I'll just like keep it very very like top level for you guys to give me your thoughts.
Abdulaziz, go ahead. Why don't you take that?
Sasha, you go first. You go first.
So the hot potato is landing in my hand. Yeah, well, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because it's never as simple as just yes and no. But I'm an avid proponent of digital tools. I have been building a lot of my cars in Alias from very early days, and I'm very hands-on until this moment. Very kind of 3D modeling focused approach that I'm personally a big fan of. But I would not be able to do the 3D models with the level of quality and the level of understanding of sculpture that I have now without the experience of working with some of the best clay modeling teams in the world, and the experience that I got by speaking to the clay guys, by them explaining their craft and their trade, explaining to me what the sequence of steps that they take to achieve the results. So my basically building up of skills happened in an analog way, and then the application of skills happened in a digital way. So yes, I'm going fully digital, but I don't think I would be as quick or successful as I potentially can be now without the experience in my early days of working on many full-size clay models with amazing, talented clay sculptors.
Well, that's great. I mean, To me, I think from my personal point of view, I think it's whether we're going digital. I mean, of course, digital has a huge part of the process in car design as well. But I think like, are we going to go digital fully? Um, I don't think so. I mean, like looking at physical models and we're actually building them, you know, it's just I believe it's going to just continue. I mean, by the end of the day, we're going to ride this vehicle. You know, we're going to experience it. You know, in all means. You know, we're going to ride in it. We want to see it. You know, see it in full scale, of course. Um, but you know, it's still even like the digital is completely embedded in the process, for sure.
Yeah, so like going a little bit deep in there, like what do we actually mean by digital, right? Like Sasha, you mentioned, you're fully digital, but then you also get to work with really amazing clay sculptures, and that has been part of your learning. And we're always going to need some physical, something physical to be able to assess a car that is going to end up being real, right? Like full stop. Like the car is going to exist in the real world, right? But then what do we mean by digital, or like when is digital a good moment? Do we mean digital as in like now this craft that we used to have in a physical world, now we're starting to like bring it into the digital world, meaning is 3D now starting to become a very useful thing for designers, where before it was kind of like this broken up process, right? Like designers were 2D, they were just kind of like sketching, and then somebody else had to do the 3D, and now we're starting to see those lines blur. But it's a very tricky topic, right? Like you're kind of like stepping on people's toes when you're starting to think about that.
Well, I guess a couple of additional points to what I already said in my previous statement. I do still believe in seeing the models in physical form. So whenever there is budget in the project to mill a full-size model, I'm always the first one to kind of pursue that. Even if it's not a fully detailed, super duper high-end expensive model, but just to see the volume in physical in front of you. The only rule that I apply is not doing any work by hand, looking at the model, maybe putting some tape lines, doing some photographs, and going back into CAD and continuing in CAD. Because I believe that if you start with doing changes by hand, and then you actually scan those changes, and then you reverse engineer them into Surface, it's a little bit like recording music through a microphone, playing it through speakers, and recording it again through the microphone. You lose a lot. And the real magic happens not in the sketch. The real magic happens directly in sculpture. And if you can sculpt in the same language that the rest of the company will be using to produce the vehicle, which is the language of mathematics and the language of NURBS, actually, and mathematical surfaces, if you can speak that language fluently, then you avoid the need of translating phases of basically this data quality loss phases that go from analog to digital, from polygons to NURBS. Like all these phase transitions, they cost quality, and I'm trying to minimize that by, yes, you look at the physical model, you make a few photographs of the changes you want to make, maybe you put a few knife or tape lines on it, and you know exactly where you want to move your volumes. Then you jump back into CAD and you continue in CAD. And about stepping on other people's toes, I think that's also an important point. And in my teams, I was lucky enough to kind of create teams that worked with my vision, my approach. I always encouraged blurring the lines between traditional sculptors and traditional designers. So I don't see myself as either. I see myself as more like a car guy, car creator. And I would like to empower everybody else in the team to think in the same way, that you don't have this traditional role split between, one guy comes up with cool ideas and the other guy kind of, or girl, builds and models them. No, like everybody's engaged in maturing the product. Everybody's engaged in contributing to the product. And there's this approach of, if I fully expect the designers to contribute directly to the NURBS CAD, and I also expect the modelers to bring ideas to the table and to say, we found a new solution for this, or we have an idea for that. So blurring those lines, instead of stepping on people's toes, it actually empowers them. I've had many team members approach me and say this is the most fun they've had, because normally their opinion is not needed or not heard. And in our process, everyone's opinion really counts.
That is like that last thing that you just said, Sasha, I think is like super important. And I mean, you've been speaking about like speaking the same language, and I think now seeing many more designers go into the 3D space without hesitation is going to allow this to happen for real. Because yeah, the process has been very linear, but what happens if like conversations can start to happen very early on in the process? What kind of cars could we end up having? What kind of like compromises would we not have to have? Because sometimes you end up very far into the process and you can't really go back because all this time has been wasted or used, because these conversations never happen. So I think that's a super important point that you just touched on, like, you know, bringing everyone into the process as opposed to like having these kind of like steps into the process. And also like yeah, I would say, yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about what Abdulaziz has to say about this,
I mean,
especially
I mean,
because I remember in some of the conversations that we had before, you spoke about like, for example, for you, it's really difficult to have kind of like a physical sculpture created in clay. And so how are you dealing with all of this? And then also, you know, like what are these kind of like same languages being spoken, for example, in your studio?
yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I totally agree with Sasha on some of the points. Now, with, I mean, if we go back in like when Harley Girl started, you know, building physical cars back in 1920, um, it was overwhelming, you know, and then we see how that led to using clay and actually building these concept cars. And I think just, you know, the ability to actually, you know, sculpt cars in clay is it's just like a whole different experience, you know. And you know, let's say before digital, you know, it was you have the sketch and then you have, you know, the bucket, and then you start, you know, filling it up with clay and then sculpting it. Now when you combine these two tools together, you know, I think you get um, great results, you know. Now the clay I use here in our physical models, you know, is quite different because it has the opposite of what an industrial clay is, you know. Instead of being, you know, where you use it while it's hot, then it's, you know, it's stiffen up. It's kind of, you know, the opposite. Once it gets hard, it start cracking. So I'd have to quickly get it into shape, you know, and then kind of put some fiberglass on top of it just to kind of preserve it. Now the disadvantage of this process is that, you know, it's a lot harder to add and subtract if you're not using the actual industrial clay.
Good. And so let's change gears a little bit and talk about, well, go deep into, Sasha, I would love to hear a little bit more about your process. You're not the traditional designer. And so, but then everybody wants to be you, right?
I
So
don't know. I don't know if I want to be me. That's fine.
tell us about your process. Like how does
Uh,
it start? How does it evolve? When do
yeah.
you start bringing people into the conversation?
So yeah, it's kind of a process born out of necessity, I would say, and the necessity was, of course, the competitive nature of the design studios where I worked in, and we had even in the early days in Potsdam a very competitive team of designers, and there were some amazing projects, but everybody wanted to win, and quite often I wasn't the one winning. So the competitive nature was what forced me to change gears and to apply my new process to the workflow. And I decided that from a certain point on, instead of making lots of different sketches for every project, I would start building CAD models, and I would build those CAD models and present them alongside other designers who were still in the sketch phase. And a couple of times that really went into my favor, where I had a CAD model that was looking quite convincing, while the others had some beautiful 2D output. But then it was easy for the design manager or the chief designer to press the button, machine my model as the proportion model, and the rest of the designers were still working on sketch work. So already I had a full size while somebody else still had sketches. That really was a competitive edge. And another thing that happened was I worked a lot in Lamborghini, but I still lived in Germany, so I traveled a lot. And the travel time with my laptop, I realized, well, I could if I learned how to build cars properly, I could use that travel time to contribute to the development of the Huracan, which was happening at that time, and really just, work directly on the surfaces of that car, instead of coming up with a set of sketches and telling, the Italian bosses, hey, this is what I think we should do. No, here's the front, here's the back, here's the new body side, here's some new details. And you always contributed directly into the program. You never needed someone's approval. Nobody had to say, hey, this sketch is better than that sketch. No, here's the front. Do you like it or not? And if you do, we can use this front. And it was a much more direct integration of your ideas into the development. And then next phases also came very naturally for me, where I realized, look, I want to be aware of the rest of the car. I don't want to just work on the exterior and then the interior. I also want to work on what's under the skin. I want to understand how the subframes work. I want to understand how the monocoque design works. And this already more later in my career with Koenigsegg, where I had access to like the actual engineering stuff on the cars, and was able to also in Alias contribute to that, just to make very important changes on the architecture side of the cars directly with my tools, and influence the process of creating an actual high performance vehicle and not just a full size clay model. There's a very different level of commitment when it comes to these two different disciplines. So born out of necessity, but at the end of the day, what I feel like is the most streamlined and most efficient work process. Start with a little doodle, never show the doodle to anyone, build it in CAD. When it's convincing, then you show it to people, then you discuss it, you compare notes, and you work together with the team to make the best proposals come together into one car.
Nice. And did you find yourself, when you were going through that process out of necessity, do you find yourself frustrated, or maybe you've always been kind of like very natural to CAD, but like frustrated with learning the tool? Eventually it became second nature, right? No? Okay, cool.
No, so my first time I opened Alias, I was 14 years old. So that was my first experience with Alias. And I learned it by the time I was at Art Center. I already had some basic skills with Alias, and it only matured from there. I would say my sketching hand works like an Alias machine. When I sketch, I know exactly what I'm going to, how I'm building this, exactly what the process I'm going to take. And I have a few relatively innovative sculpting approaches. I use a lot of multi-span surfaces, so single patches that span the whole car basically. And I direct model a lot of my geometry onto those. I start with flat planes. So it's a very unorthodox. To some people who know sub-D, it's basically modeling like you're doing in sub-D, but with NURBS patches, which is kind of, for me, a very happy middle ground, because you have a very direct and natural flow in the way you sculpt everything, but it's still mathematically perfect, and there's still evaluation tools, and there's still perfect control over your highlights and managing your cross-sections and adhering to package. The flexibility of sub-D, but the precision of NURBS, basically, in one package.
Yeah. And do you consider yourself very different? I mean, obviously your process is very different, but do you consider yourself very different in the way that you think to other designers? Or do you think everyone has the ability to be able to get there? Just the problem is that, the traditional process, or what we get taught at school, is not that, right? Like, it's something else.
Well, I think that, first of all, I've never lived in someone else's brain, so I don't know how that other person's brain actually functions.
But you've worked with many other designers.
But I've worked with many other designers, and from the moment of initial hesitancy, which quite often takes place, to the moment of complete embracing of the process is usually about 3 to 6 months. But once the process has been embraced, they never walk away. They just do not walk away, because this is in my mind, the only right way to do it. It's basically the learning barrier and the learning curve is quite steep, and maybe not as easy to get into. But once you've mastered that initial kind of shock, then you are really appreciating the newfound knowledge. And one thing I wanted to say on that subject is, a lot of the times tools for designers are designed in a way that they are simpler than tools need to be. It's for some reason that the industry believes that designers require simpler set of tools. Like, there's a Lego Technic, but there's also Lego Duplo, and the designers should play with Duplo while everybody else in the company works with Technic. And it's why? If you are, as a designer, you have the same or more gray matter in your skull than most other people. So why don't you use that to learn the actual tools and speak the actual language, instead of learning a new sign language or a new way to whistle tunes? Learn to write the score. Learn to sit down and write the actual notes that go into the symphony, and then you'll be precise, and everybody will know exactly what to play.
Speak the same language. I love you keep saying that. I imagine you have seen more of your ideas that were here driving in the streets than many designers,
Well,
because you
I'm very
started
lucky for that.
in 3D.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but that happens when you work in 3D, right? Like straight away.
It's much more than that, Daniela. There's of course, you need to understand the full landscape of a car company to get your ideas out there. It's not just about working in 3D. It's about understanding, what is this company going to do for the next vehicle? What is the correct answer for the market? What is the correct answer for the customer? What is the correct answer for the vision of the brand? And all these ideas come together in your mind, but the output is, end effect, is a digital car.
Yeah. So Abdulaziz, can you tell us a little bit about your process?
Yeah, there are various processes that I kind of experiment with, but I think like a lot of times I would depending on really the vehicle you're designing, um, like there's this vehicle that we're working on. It's a wheelchair accessible vehicle, but also have the ability to seat three. Um, So kind of something like that, we had to take it from sketches to 3D model and then start building a mock-up out of wood just to kind of study uh, how the ease of entry to the vehicle, and then moving back to digital to kind of update the CAD drawings, and that helped in actually milling the parts. Um, and a lot of times I think if you can't translate your sketch to digital, or just kind of not sure of how your lines kind of fall down into building the CAD model, it will look completely different than your sketch. So I think this is why it's important to kind of study really how the packaging work on vehicles, how to actually do proper proportions, because you know um, there's a lot. I see a lot of like cool sketches, but when it comes to actually um, executing it, it just doesn't make sense. So I think it's important to just kind of have a good foundation to kind of kickstart your project, or your client project, or if you work for a company. I think that's a key. Um, but yeah, I think it's the process is pretty much the same. It's just a matter of kind of shifting, uh, where you start with, depending on really the organization or the type of projects you're working on.
And so I would love to start jumping into the questions from the audience before we bring our Q&A guest. So there's one from Josue Maldonado. Hey, Josue. Has anyone seen car sculptures blend their skills with digital and see them become designers?
So I don't fully understand the question because I'm not really sure what car sculptors blend their skills with digital means in this case. Which car sculptors are we talking about? I've seen a few clay guys make an incredibly successful transition into CAD. Again, because the guys who work in clay, they just have such a great understanding of sculpture and such a great understanding of also the steps you need to take to create the right volumes, and where do you start and where do you continue. A lot of the 3D tutorials that I see online are so wrong in the way they start modeling a car. They'll start with like the headlight or the bumper, and you just wonder, what are you doing? And then the clay guys, the actual people who've built cars for a living their entire lives, they know exactly where to start and where to continue. And when they bring that feel and that natural flow into CAD, you can tell that the person has not a background in mathematics and not a background in computer graphics, but a background in car sculpture. You can really see that. So some of the best guys I've worked with have that hand talent in their hands that translated into 3D.
That's interesting. And we don't hear that often, right? Like maybe there's something that needs to be done there for clay sculptures to be the ones teaching CAD.
I think so. Or teaching general car sculpture theory. That would be a very important course to explain what are the defining things about the volume of a car. What is a window barrel? What is, how do you go from the roof Y0 into a cant rail, and from window barrel to the cant rail into the belt line, from belt line to the shoulder. There's a lot of a lot of people are trying to invent the wheel every time they do a car, but there's actually a very clear sequence of events and steps that need to be taken to have a healthy cabin and a healthy volume.
Which maybe that conversation wasn't, wasn't interesting, or like nobody was paying attention to that before, right? Because people were just doing sketches and like very, very dramatic sketches, right? But now that we're starting to see this shift into 3D, then all of this starts to make sense and also is needed, right? And there's nothing around that because it's all so new. So glad
Personally,
you're
I would never pay anyone for sketches. I find that, you know what, if you need to do sketches, make that your private hobby. There's absolutely no value in that in the design process, not in my opinion.
big statement from Sasha. Abdulaziz, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to add, like I've seen like few. So we do like open house like at our design studio every time, and we have like some participant. They come in and they bring in their sketches, uh, and they tell me that they're building this car and they've been working on it for a while. And I think they would show me some really rough out like you know. Digital model, that doesn't look anything like the car they're building or the sketch they're doing, and I think that leads, into the continuation of the project. I think it's so important to really have like all the data like really in a very solid way to build, the car, But if the goal is just to kind of have something that just looks cool, like an art piece, that's like a whole nother situation.
And I'll have one more question from the audience, and then I'll bring our guest speaker. And this one is from Nick Gravely because he's a bit confused. I think Sasha, he thinks that you're finally gotten into VR. He says like, I'm so surprised though, as Sasha wasn't into VR at 6 months ago when we had an exchange. Does this mean that designers are starting to come around?
I'm not a very stubborn person, so I'm really happy to come around if there's something that is of value. Up till this day, I have not fully embraced VR. Maybe I'm like somehow too old, but I have all the tools I need in terms of evaluating my surfaces and my data directly in CAD. So I don't need the added layer of reality in terms of the goggles. If there's money that can be spent on a like $30,000 or euro full-size foam model, that's for me the most valuable way I can evaluate the car. I appreciate people who use VR. I think that's if it brings results to their workflow, it's great. But for me, I have not come around to it, not yet.
Yeah, there you go, Nick. And Abdulaziz, you do use a bit of VR in your process, right?
I do, yeah. I do visualize and kind of do some of the mocking up the space and things like that. I have like some sort of an idea or sketch, in mind. I rather to go in and sketch it in real time. I think that's a very interesting experience. Like I remember when first, I think 2016 or around that, when I got my first VR set, just to kind of experience what it would be like to sketch something in kind of, I would say, real or in virtual way, and yeah, I think that helped me kind of realize that, gave me a little bit of sort of a confidence. That time I was a student, it gave me a little bit of confidence to push my idea through and actually get to build it.
Nice.
It kind of helped me validate the vision I had. I was like, wait, okay, it looks like it's going to work here, but that's a whole nother challenge when I end up, starting to build it. Just this, you get to kind of experience what really works and what's not,
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, I would love to welcome Esa Mustonen into the stage. Esa,
Hello.
Around.
Hey, dude.
So, do you
Thanks
have
a
any
lot for
questions for speaker?
Yeah, in fact, the topic is obviously very close to my heart because I'm always looking to optimize my workflow too. But I guess one question came to mind is like, obviously we try to optimize everything, but has anything that you try to optimize has like gone too far, where in the end you're like, actually, I tried to push it, but actually this step is necessary and I have to bring it back?
Is that a question, Issa?
Yeah, it is a question. Is there anything a step
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, for sure. You should not eliminate your brain from the equation. If you've streamlined the process to the point where the mind is gone completely missing, then you've probably gone one step too far. I'm talking about AI at this point in time. It's a subtle dig.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. What about for you, Abdulaziz?
I kind of like I couldn't hear it properly. My bad.
Like when you're trying to optimize the workflow and like try to start streamline your process, has there ever been a step where you thought you could optimize, but in the end you're like, no, you cannot take it out, whether it's clay or 2D sketches or any step of the workflow?
Yeah, I mean, I think are you saying like I think just to kind of correct me if I'm wrong, right? So is it possible to optimize, like I couldn't quite get it, my bad.
Is there a step in the workflow that you think will never get eliminated because it's so necessary, whether it's just pen and paper or sketches or 3D or clay?
I mean, to me, I just like, I think that's just the natural kind of approach,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the process I know, and that's the process I kind of believe and trust. So it's I think it's really hard to just like kind of break in and start like using some new tools. Sometimes it's kind of challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, it's of course beneficial in a way, but of course it gets challenging in my perspective.
Yeah.
Like to me, digital was very challenging in the beginning. I couldn't get it, but then later on, you just keep doing it and then you fail. And then sometimes you just have to do it. You have to do it, and you just end up having to do it. And if you're not really good at it, then you'll have to find someone that is good at it, and it just, I think like work with someone that really knows kind of, how to do it. Otherwise, it's just you're gonna have a half-baked cake, and you just don't want that. So.
Yeah. Another question I had kind of relates to what Sasha was saying, that the designers shouldn't be so disconnected from the modeling aspect. But speaking of that, how disconnected do you think designers are from engineering? Because it seems like with OEMs, they're a different department. You never see them. Like, do you think designers should be at very core of the engineering aspect as well?
And Essa, you and I were at Koenigsegg together, so you remember exactly how involved we were in the engineering stuff. And you were also at Genesis with me, and you remember how little involvement it was there. So in my experience, also from Volkswagen Group and from Bugatti and Lamborghini, Koenigsegg was the first place I was truly at home because of the level of engagement with engineering. And I think that 3D and sculpture is the first battle that I'm personally facing in terms of, let's say, indoctrinating the younger generation. But engineering is definitely close second, if not the first, really, because engineering is the foundation of what makes the cars good. And if engineering is not done right, the car will never be good. It doesn't matter what theme you came up with or what feature design language or sculptural language you come up with. If the bones underneath that are unhealthy, it will look like an unhealthy car no matter what you do. And understanding those bones and understanding how to design them, how to influence them, how to argue for the better solutions, it really means being part of the engineering team and understanding exactly what goes on, not only in terms of classical engineering, but also in terms of carryover part strategy, in terms of purchasing, in terms of cost, bill of materials, all of that. So that level of kind of understanding of the entire process, engineering, and the rest of the company indeed is necessary to create beautiful cars. It's not just about sketching and design skills. And you know that because we were there. at least from that experience.
100%. I agree.
I guess a follow-up is, why do you think OEMs are so disconnected? Is it just because of the size? They fragment so much that it's impossible to sustain?
I think you nailed it. It's the size. And when the size grows, you need to implement processes. You need to implement very rigid processes, because otherwise it's very chaotic. So when you have a company of 20 people, it's very easy to handshake and agree what we're going to do. When you have a company of 600,000 people, like some of the modern OEMs, it's very difficult to create these kinds of blurred lines between disciplines, because then you have designers meddling in engineering, then you have engineers meddling in design, and it's much easier to just say, you know what, here's your silo, you sit within that silo and you don't talk to anyone outside of a special appointment. When you speak to someone, there's a special appointment when you can speak to the engineer, and you don't speak to any engineer, you speak to the one engineer who is the liaison between the design and engineering, and he's the one who brings you from the engineering department all of their latest findings, and you cannot challenge them. Well, you can challenge them, but the challenge just disappears. Right? So the size is really the reason, and I'm not ready to criticize big OEMs, because I understand that the size is a massive constraint on their workflow. But as designers, when we choose companies to work for, at least in my current stage, I would much rather be working in a small dedicated team than in a big kind of monstrous corporation. I don't know, Abdulaziz, if you are on the same page or not. But
no, I mean, I'm 100%. I mean, I think like the ability to be working with a smaller team is just completely just how Sasha mentioned. You could just quickly agree or disagree on stuff and just kind of fix it, or kind of have the conversation between the designer and the engineers to just communicate. And I think if a designer doesn't know the basics of really how things work, it's just they'll never agree on anything, right? So a lot of times you have to kind of challenge the engineers as well, But the question is, how are you going to actually do that, which is, I think that's the fun part, It's frustrating sometimes when you do something and it's just, it's not going to work, or somebody come and tells you it doesn't going to work, and it's just, you'll have to innovate and come up with something else, And if you have an engineer by your side, believes in the same vision as well, most likely it will be solved.
If you then had to go to, let's say, Sasha, you were dropped back to a big OEM and told to not just build a team, but change the way to do their design, like how would you approach it? Also, I guess, how would you approach hiring the people? Because I guess you would concentrate on just hiring the least amount of people, but that's not always very easy.
So that's a really good question, Asa, because in my opinion, most of the design departments are actually terribly overstaffed. There's just a lot of people in them that are not necessary for the process. In my experience, most of the time, it's 2 or 3 designers that win everything, and the rest of them are just, unfortunately, working for the bin, so to speak. So for a car company to justify running a design department with 200 people or 300 people, of which 95% are working for the bin, is very difficult. So I don't want to be such a brutal bastard to say I'd fire everyone, but I would definitely pick the A team and make sure that they are working in a separate workflow with a group of engineers, and create skunkworks operation where there's very limited amount of kind of noise penetrating through the walls, and then a dedicated team that creates the product. And what the company decides to do with the rest of the overstaffed engineering, design, and marketing, and whatever departments, is their decision. I don't think I would be hired as a CEO. I mean, I'm not looking for another job at the moment anyway, but I would definitely scale into these skunkworksy organizations, like we did at Raw Design as well, where we had from Christian a very clear kind of skunkworks mission, where we had the chance to do a lot more than just design in the room. Probably do that at any OEM and see the results of that little team. In comparison with the rest of the engineering and design floor, it should be a pretty a significant amount of process and quality improvement, probably a carnage.
Yeah.
Good. Let's open up a little bit more for more questions from the audience. I had some good ones here. Sasha, do you import parts from CAD to modify organically?
Don't fully understand the question. I mean, I have a really large library of things that both I have built, but also cars that are on the road today. If I have scans of those cars or some game models, I always reference, because for me it's very important that the design idea that we have lives in the context of other vehicles on the road. So I'll have like I'll think of, for example, the fact that the Generation 2 Audi TT had a really nice position of taillight in relation to the rear wheel. So I'll bring that model in and I'll be like, okay, where is that taillight in comparison to the rear wheel? That's a healthy relationship. I'm designing a completely different car, not at all Bauhaus. It's something way more emotional and more sculptural, but I really want to reference that taillight position to the rear wheel. So there's a lot of, my method is very scientific. I don't come up with things from kind of thin air. There's always a point of reference, a historically significant point of reference, or engineering significant point of reference, where you say, well, if they were able to do a wheel envelope around the front wheel that is so tight on the GT3 RS, why can't we? And then I import that wheel arch curve with the wheel in position and evaluate what it does and think about the wheel envelope and how are they able to clear, what happens behind. So there's a lot of research that goes into my work. It's not kind of a artist's like flight of fancy. That's not at all the case. It's a very kind of dogmatic, learning, reference-driven workflow. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
hopefully. Here's one from Andreas Bastidas. As a designer who does a lot of 3D, what would the best way to showcase your 3D skills in your portfolio be without being perceived as a CAD guy?
Quality of design. When the portfolio is being looked at and the first impression that you get is, holy shit, this guy really has some kick-ass cars. That is the way you bring the point across that you're a designer. If you open the first page and you're like, oh man, that's really ugly, but actually the CAD work is nice, well, then you're a CAD guy. So the idea that you kind of surprise first and foremost with the quality and the vision and the design and your taste and kind of your thoughts and not your skills, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Totally.
Well, all right. Well, we've arrived to the end of the session. Thank you so much, Abdulaziz, Sasha, Isa, for joining us today. It's been a really good conversation. Sasha, I thought you were going to go harder on like easier tools like Gravity Sketch, but you didn't. So
yeah, no, I'm peaceful today.
Right.
Well, thank you guys for having me and for this interesting discussion. Abdulaziz, Esa, it was a pleasure. Daniela, thank you for hosting.
Pleasure.
And the rest of the team.
100%. Yeah, it's been really amazing.
Thank you all.
Like go into your brains a little bit.